Don't bother setting a place for her. We don't need that old hag anymore." That's how my Christmas began. My grandson's voice carrying through the doorway like a knife. His sister snorted, her laughter bouncing off the tinsel-trimmed walls. I was still on the porch, snow clinging to my boots, arms full of gifts wrapped with shaking hands. They hadn't even noticed me standing there. Or maybe they had, and didn't care. My name is Josephine Carter, 76 years old, a widow, a grandmother, once the heart of this family. Now, apparently, nothing more than a punchline. The night air bit at my cheeks, colder than I could remember. From where I stood, I saw the glow of their Christmas tree flicker through the frosted window, red and green lights splashing across the snow like cruel confetti. Inside, their voices rose with cheer. Someone popped a cork. The fire snapped and crackled. The smell of roasted ham drifted out through the cracks, warm and rich. I stood outside like a beggar staring into someone else's feast. I shifted the bags in my arms. One ripped. An apple tumbled out, rolled across the porch, and landed in the snow. No one inside heard. No one came to open the door. I used to be the one who carried Christmas. The stockings I sewed by hand, the dinners I stretched on pennies, the songs I hummed when the children couldn't sleep. I kept the magic alive when money was thin and hope was thinner, and now, the same mouths I once fed dismissed me like spoiled leftovers. I set the bags down gently on the porch step. The gifts inside weren't grand. Scarves I knitted myself, jars of jam, small trinkets from the thrift store, but they had cost me hours, days, weeks of effort. My fingers ached from the knitting needles. My eyes strained from the tiny stitches, but it hadn't mattered, not to them. I didn't knock. I didn't beg for a chair at their table. I turned, letting the snow crunch beneath my feet as I walked back into the night. Behind me, laughter burst louder, drowning out the sound of my retreat. Back home, my own house was dark, the porch light barely cutting through the storm. I switched it on and let myself in. The warmth of the radiator didn't chase the chill from my bones. I placed the abandoned gifts on my kitchen table and lit the tiny artificial tree I had set up days ago. Its glow was weak, uneven, a poor imitation of theirs. I made tea, watched the steam curl upward, and listened to the tick of the wall clock. Tick, tick. Each second reminding me I wasn't wanted. Each second daring me to do something with the silence. I thought about every Christmas past, the years I stayed up all night wrapping gifts, the way their faces lit up in the morning, the thank yous shouted between bites of cinnamon rolls. I thought about the promises they made back when they were small and still clung to my hand. "Grandma will never forget you." They already had. I walked to the back room. In the cedar chest lay the things they assumed were forgotten: the deed to my house, letters I'd kept, documents they had never seen, pieces of proof, pieces of power. I laid them out on the table. The deed with my name alone. The letters of thanks from their schools when I had donated what little I had. Even photographs of their parents as children, faces smiling because of me. They thought I was finished, that I would sit quietly knitting away the last of my days, grateful for scraps of attention. But as I stared at those papers, something inside me shifted. My hands stopped shaking, my breath slowed. "They think Christmas is better without me," I whispered into the quiet. "They've mistaken silence for surrender." The tea had gone cold, but my resolve burned hot. And that night, while they laughed under the glow of their tree, I began to plan. The next morning, I woke to silence. No phone calls, no texts, no Merry Christmas, Grandma. Nothing. The clock read 7:12, the time I used to hear little fists banging on my door, voices squealing, "Wake up, Grandma, Santa came." Now, the only sound was the radiator groaning in the corner. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee. The steam rose in curls, but it didn't warm me. My phone lay flat on the table, screen black, useless. I didn't touch it. I already knew it would stay that way. By mid-morning, the church bells rang down the street. The sound carried faintly through the cold air, solemn and steady. Families would be gathering, hugging, passing casseroles around. Mine? They were probably opening gifts, laughing, posting pictures, smiles posed just right, matching sweaters, captions about family and blessings, the kind of images strangers admire online, never knowing the truth. At noon, curiosity got the better of me. I opened my laptop and typed in the social media page I knew too well, and there it was, the proof. Photos from their living room, the Christmas tree glowing, the table piled high with food, my daughter smiling with a glass of wine, the grandchildren in matching pajamas, even the dog in a ridiculous sweater. And me? Absent. Not just forgotten. Erased. One photo stopped me cold. My granddaughter stood in front of the tree holding up a scarf, one of my scarves. I recognized the pattern immediately. Red wool with a row of tiny snowflakes stitched along the edge. I had knitted it weeks ago and wrapped it carefully in shiny paper. I had carried it to their house last night. I left it on their porch. Yet there it was in her hands, presented as though it had come from someone else. The caption read, "From Mom and Dad. She loves it." I leaned closer, staring at the glow of the screen. They hadn't just shut me out. They had stolen my gift and claimed it as theirs. My work, my love, repackaged and renamed. The bitterness in my chest hardened. That evening, I wandered to the cedar chest again. I laid out the papers across the table. The deed, the letters, bank statements I hadn't touched in years, pages that bore my name in black ink. As I sifted through them, something caught my eye, a copy of my will, written more than a decade ago. Back then, I'd been soft, foolish, every line left to family, to them, to the very ones who now called me a hag. I read each line slowly, the words blurring together. I felt the old version of myself staring back from the paper, the woman who believed love was enough to guarantee loyalty. That woman was gone. The will was a weakness, a rope around my neck. I folded it once, then again, then tucked it into an envelope. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow I'd walk into a lawyer's office and change everything. But it wasn't just about money, not anymore. It was about history, about truth. I pulled out the photo albums stacked in the bottom of the chest. One by one, I turned the pages. My daughter in pigtails on her first day of school. My son-in-law smiling sheepishly the day I fixed his torn jacket. The grandchildren as toddlers, faces sticky with jam at my kitchen table. Every picture told a story they no longer acknowledged. Every image was proof that I had been the backbone of their lives. And now they mocked me, erased me. A knock at the door startled me, sharp, quick. I froze, the photo album open in my lap. It was nearly 9 p.m. Who would come this late on Christmas? I opened the door cautiously. On the porch stood my neighbor, Kay, wrapped in a heavy coat. Snow dusting her shoulders, she held a plate covered with foil. "Brought you some pie," she said softly. "Thought you might like company." I forced a smile and invited her in. We sat at the table, steam rising from the slices of apple pie. She chatted about her grandchildren, about the choir performance at church. I nodded, pretending to listen. Then she asked it, the question I dreaded. "Why weren't you with your family today?" For a moment, my throat tightened. I wanted to lie, to say they were away, to spare myself the shame. But then I saw the flicker in her eyes. She already knew. Neighbors always know. "They didn't invite me," I said simply. My voice was steady, but my chest burned. Kay's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Didn't invite you? On Christmas? I shook my head. Said they don't need me anymore. She set her fork down slowly, lips pressed tight. She didn't say pitying words. She didn't offer comfort. She just sat with me in the silence, which was the kindest thing she could have done. When she left, I locked the door and stood alone in the quiet. I turned back to the table where the documents still lay scattered, the will, the deed, the photographs, and that's when it struck me. They weren't just ungrateful, they were careless. They believed I was powerless. But the truth was written on every line of those papers. My name, my ownership, my proof. I gathered the documents into a neat stack, slipped them into a folder, and placed it by the door. Tomorrow, I would begin. I walked to the window, pulled back the curtain, and looked out at the snow-covered street. Across the way, their house still glowed with Christmas lights, laughter spilling faintly into the night. I could almost hear them, glasses clinking, jokes at my expense. They thought they were safe in that glow, thought they had buried me in silence. But Christmas ends. Lights go dark. And when the new year comes, so will I. The folder by my door felt heavier than it should have. All night I woke in starts, hearing echoes of their laughter in my head. We don't need that old hag anymore. Each time I stared into the dark and felt my resolve harden. By morning, the sky was gray, a low winter light pressing against the curtains. I made coffee, strong. Steam curled from the chipped mug, drifting toward the frosted window. The world outside looked quiet, but my mind was not. Today wasn't about waiting. It was about moving. I dressed carefully. Wool skirt, my heaviest coat, the scarf my husband once bought me at a county fair. Not for them, for me. A soldier puts on armor before the first battle. By 10, I was downtown, folder tucked under my arm. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of old paper and coffee grounds. A young receptionist with neat hair and red nails greeted me politely. "Do you have an appointment?" "I don't," I said, "but I need to speak with someone today." Her eyes flickered. Something about the way I spoke must have landed. She made a quick call, and within minutes I was seated across from a man in a navy suit whose desk was buried in files. His nameplate read, "Evan Harper, attorney at law." He smiled kindly. "How can I help you, Mrs. Carter?" I said. "Josephine Carter. And I want to make changes to my will, immediately." That got his attention. He straightened, picked up a pen. "All right. Do you have current documents?" I slid the folder across the desk. He opened it, scanning the brittle pages, the signatures in fading ink. "This names your children and grandchildren as beneficiaries," he murmured. "Do you wish to amend or replace?" "Replace," I said flatly. "Erase them. Every name, every line." He looked up, surprised but professional. "And instead? Instead, I'll decide carefully. For now, I want the estate held in trust until I say otherwise. Nothing for the family, not 1 cent." There it was, the first cut, a line of ink sharper than any knife. He nodded slowly, scribbling notes. "We'll prepare a full revision. You'll need to choose an executor." "I'll find someone trustworthy," I said, "but it won't be blood." When I left the office, the folder felt lighter. My footsteps on the icy sidewalk sounded steadier. I passed holiday decorations still strung up on lampposts, their colors already fading, and I thought about how quickly cheer sours once the season is over. That afternoon, I stopped by the bank. My hands didn't tremble when I spoke to the manager. "Remove every co-signer. Cancel all authorizations linked to my accounts." He raised his brows but didn't argue. By the time I walked out, my money was mine alone again. At home, I sat at the table, spreading the new papers across the wood. Proof of action. Proof that silence didn't mean surrender. By evening, I decided it was time for the grandchildren to feel the first ripple, not the tidal wave, just enough to unsettle the ground beneath their feet. I picked up the phone, dialed the school where my oldest grandson was enrolled. I knew the bursar by name. After all, I had paid for his tuition more than once when deadlines loomed. "Yes," I said calmly. "I'd like to withdraw my pledge for next semester. No further support from me." The woman hesitated, papers rustling on the other end. "Are you sure, Mrs. Carter? He'll lose his scholarship supplement without that." "I'm sure," I said. "Let him ask his parents. Or better yet, let him work for it." The click of the receiver sliding into place was as satisfying as any carol I'd ever heard. Later that night, I imagined the scene, the phone call he'd get, the panic in his voice when he realized the cushion was gone. They had all grown soft on my sacrifices. Time they learned what life felt like without them. I didn't stop there. A small, sharp strike needs an echo. I wrapped the scarf I had knitted, the twin to the one they stole, and placed it in a box. I wrote a note on plain paper. "Stolen kindness turns cold fast. Some things aren't yours to claim." No signature. I mailed it anonymously the next morning. By noon, I was back at my table, sipping coffee gone lukewarm. The clock ticked, snow slid from the roof in heavy clumps, and I waited. It didn't take long. That evening, my daughter called. Her voice was tight, brittle. "Mother, did you cancel Jacob's tuition support? The school says you withdrew." "Yes," I said simply. Silence. Then, "Why? He depends on that." "Maybe he should depend on himself," I replied, "or on you for once." She sputtered, grasping for words. You can't just—" "I can," I cut in. My voice was calm. "And I will." The line went quiet. Then she hissed, "They'll hate you for this." I almost laughed. "They already do." I hung up before she could answer. The house was quiet again, but the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt deliberate. Chosen. Across the street, their windows still glowed with Christmas lights, though dimmer now. I imagined their little circle of comfort rattled. My absence suddenly heavier than my presence. They had pushed me out. Now they would learn what it meant when I stopped holding them up. I stood at the window, watching the snow fall in steady sheets, the street empty, except for the flicker of a lone street lamp. My reflection stared back, not frail, not finished. Awake. The first strike had landed, and it was only the beginning. For 2 days, the phone didn't stop ringing. My daughter, my son-in-law, even the grandchildren tried, though I knew they didn't want to hear my voice. They wanted my money. I let the calls go unanswered. The machine filled with their voices, each one more frantic than the last. "Grandma, you don't understand. College is expensive." "Mom, this is cruel. He needs stability." "Mother, we'll talk about Christmas later. Just fix this." I sat at the kitchen table, knitting needles clicking softly, the steady rhythm drowning out their pleas. The scarf growing in my lap was deep green, thick and warm, a color no one in my family would ever wear. This one was mine. But even as I worked, a thought crept in. Doubt. Had I gone too far? My grandson had depended on that tuition. Would the blame fall on him or on the parents who raised him to expect handouts? I told myself it was the latter, but the ache in my chest lingered. On the third day, a knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I opened it to find my youngest granddaughter, Emma, standing on the porch. No coat, just a sweatshirt with the school logo stretched across her chest, hair tangled from the wind. "Grandma," she said, eyes wide, "can I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. She walked into the warmth, rubbing her arms. She didn't bring gifts, didn't even take off her shoes before dropping onto the couch. She looked smaller than I remembered. "They're mad at you," she blurted, "really mad." "I know," I said, "but I'm not." Her voice softened. I think you were right." That stopped me. I set my knitting aside, studied her face. She was 16 now, nearly grown. But for a moment, I saw the little girl who once sat at my kitchen table coloring with stubby crayons. "Write about what?" I asked. She shrugged. "They don't appreciate you. I hear what they say when you're not around." I didn't laugh, Grandma. I promise. Her eyes were wet. She meant it, at least in that moment. For a heartbeat, I felt the ice around me crack. Maybe not everyone was lost. Maybe I still had one ally. We talked for a while. About school, about her friends, about nothing important. I made her tea, the steam fogging her glasses, and for the first time since Christmas Eve, the house felt alive again. When she left, she hugged me tight. "Don't give up," she whispered. Then she was gone, her footsteps fading into the snow. That night, doubt gnawed at me again. Could I undo what I'd done? Did I want to? I imagined walking into their house, setting down my pride, letting them fold me back into the family. I imagined the weight lifting, the silence breaking. But then I opened my laptop again, and there it was. A new photo posted by my daughter, my grandchildren, all 4 of them, crowded around the table, plates piled with food. The caption, "Family is everything." My stomach tightened. Emma wasn't in the picture. She'd been with me that day. They hadn't mentioned her absence, hadn't noticed. And the scarf, the one I had knitted and left on their porch, was around my grandson's neck again, tagged in the post as a gift from his mother. The crack in my resolve sealed shut. Still, the family must have sensed my hesitation, because the next morning my daughter showed up on my doorstep. No call first, no warning. She stood in the snow, her coat buttoned up to her chin, her expression carefully arranged into concern. "Mom," she said, "we need to talk." I let her in. She took off her gloves slowly, glanced around my house like it was foreign to her. "You've made things very difficult," she began. "Jacob can't register for his classes without that support. Do you want to ruin his future?" I said nothing. She leaned closer, lowering her voice like we were sharing a secret. "Look, we all say things we don't mean. Christmas got messy, but you know we love you. You know that." Her eyes softened, her hand reaching for mine. A practiced gesture. For a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. But then I remembered the words, sharp and unfiltered. "We don't need that old hag anymore." That wasn't a slip. That was truth. I pulled my hand back. "Love doesn't sound like that." Her face hardened instantly. The mask slipped. "Fine," she snapped. "If you won't help, don't expect us to come running when you need something." She stormed out, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the windows. I stood in the quiet, my breath steady. The doubt was gone. They wanted me weak, pliable, guilty enough to hand them everything, and for one flicker of a moment, I had nearly given in. Never again. I walked to the cedar chest, pulled out a smaller envelope I hadn't touched in years. Inside were photographs, receipts, records, pieces of history they had long forgotten, but I had not. Evidence. Leverage. I laid them out on the table, the lamplight falling across each one. My hands no longer trembled. They thought I'd regret. They thought I'd crawl back. Instead, I was gathering proof, and the next time they came knocking, they wouldn't find a grandmother. They'd find someone they couldn't control. The first week of January was quiet. Too quiet. The Christmas lights on their house came down, the wreath tossed into the garbage by the curb. Life marched on as if nothing had happened. At least, that's how it looked from the outside. From my kitchen window, I watched the street every morning with a mug of coffee in my hands, steam rising, hands steady. I half expected them to come storming over again, fists clenched, words sharp. But they didn't. They ignored me. And for a moment, I wondered if they'd finally gotten what they wanted. My silence. On the second Monday, a letter came in the mail. Thick paper, heavy ink. I knew the lawyer's letterhead before I even opened it. My daughter's handwriting scrawled in the margins. We're doing this the right way now. I sat at the table, tore it open carefully. Inside was a formal request. No, a demand. They wanted guardianship. They had filed a petition claiming I was no longer capable of managing my finances. The words leapt off the page. Elderly, wordy, declining health. Vulnerable. I stared at it a long time, the clock ticking on the wall. They weren't just stealing my Christmas anymore. They were trying to steal my life. For a few hours, I felt the old weight pressing down on me. The kind that says maybe they're right. Maybe I am too old, too tired, too small to fight. I sat in my armchair, stared at the papers, and felt my chest tighten. Then I remembered the cedar chest. The photographs, the receipts, the documents with my name bold and clear. I wasn't weak. I wasn't finished. I had proof. Still, I kept quiet. Let them believe their plan was working. False hope works both ways. 2 days later, Emma returned. She slipped into my house like a shadow, eyes darting toward the street. "They said you've lost it, Grandma," she whispered, "that you're confused, that you need help." Her hands trembled as she held out her phone. On it, I saw a family group message, my daughter's words. "She's old. She'll give up. The court will see it." Emma's eyes brimmed with tears. "I don't believe them, but they're serious, Grandma. They're trying to take everything." I placed my hand over hers, steady. "Then we let them try." She frowned. "Aren't you scared?" "Not anymore," I said. "Fear is for people with nothing to hold. I've got plenty." She didn't understand. Not yet. But she would. That night, I pulled out another folder. This one older, more fragile. Inside were letters my husband and I had exchanged with the bank years ago. Records of the mortgage we paid in full. Every receipt. Every statement stamped settled. If they wanted a fight in court, I would give them one. And not just defense, I would strike. But here's the thing. I didn't rush. I let them believe the story they were writing, that I was fading, that I'd roll over quietly. I even ignored the next call from the lawyer's office, let the machine pick up. "Mrs. Carter, please respond," the voice said politely. "We've received troubling claims from your family. We'd like to schedule a competency evaluation." Competency, a polite way of asking if I still had a mind. I smiled. For the first time in weeks, I smiled, because the more they doubted me, the sharper the trap would snap shut. Still, the days dragged. Doubt crept in late at night. When the house was too quiet and the shadows too long, what if they convinced the court? What if I lost before I even struck? One evening, I sat staring at the half-finished scarf on my lap, needles idle in my hands. I thought of my husband, of all the winters we had survived together. His voice whispered in memory. "Never let them take what you built, Joe. Never." And just like that, the doubt melted away. The next morning, I called a different lawyer, not the one my family had dragged into their scheme. A new one, recommended quietly by Kay, my neighbor who had once fought her own battle over property. His name was Richard Doyle. His voice on the phone was calm, steady, assured. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "I've seen this before. Families thinking age means weakness. Bring me everything you have, every scrap of paper. We'll build a wall they can't climb." I gathered it all, the deed, the mortgage receipts, the letters of thanks from schools, even the photographs of my husband working on this house. Proof that every board, every brick had been ours. Proof that this wasn't theirs to claim. By the time I slid the box of documents into Doyle's office, the false hope my family clung to was already slipping. They didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath them was cracking. When I left his office, snow was falling again, light and soft. The streetlights glowed through the flakes like tiny stars. I pulled my coat tighter, feeling the weight of the folder no longer in my hands, but in his. For the first time in a long while, I felt steady. That night, I sat at the window, watching their house across the street. The lights inside flickered, shadows moving across the curtains. I imagined them celebrating, smug, certain that they had finally cornered me. Let them celebrate, let them believe, because the next knock at their door won't be mine. It will be the court's. The summons landed on their doorstep before the snow melted. I didn't deliver it. I didn't have to. The court did it for me. An envelope, thick and sealed, addressed in bold letters. Respondent, Carter family versus Josephine Carter. I watched from my window as my daughter stooped to pick it up. I couldn't hear the words she muttered, but I saw the panic flash across her face. The next day, the phone rang again. This time, I answered. "Mother," she said, her voice clipped, brittle. "What have you done?" "What you wanted," I replied. "You wanted a courtroom. You'll have one." A silence followed, heavy enough to bend the air between us. Then she hissed, "You'll regret this." I hung up before she could finish. That night, I sat by the window, lamplight spilling across the papers spread on my table. My lawyer, Doyle, had been thorough. Bank records, mortgage receipts, photographs spanning decades. Every scrap of proof stacked neatly, ready for court. He'd even pulled medical statements showing I was in sound health, clear-headed and capable. "They're trying to paint you weak," he told me. "But by the time we're done, the judge will see who's really been taking advantage." I believed him. For the first time in months, I believed someone was on my side. Still, the nights were long. Doubt crept in at the edges. What if the court believed their lies? What if the years I'd given, the sacrifices I'd made, were dismissed as stories from a tired old woman? I sat awake until the radiator clicked off, knitting until my fingers cramped. Then the first crack appeared, not in me, but in them. Emma came again, slipping into the house like a shadow. Her eyes darted nervously toward the street. "They're scared, Grandma," she whispered. "They didn't expect you to fight back." "Good," I said. She pulled something from her pocket, a crumpled sheet of paper. "I thought you should see this." It was a printed message from my daughter's email. She must have left her laptop open. The words chilled me. "If she won't give up, we'll prove she's unstable, make her look dangerous. No judge will leave her in charge if we show she's a threat." I read it twice, my jaw tightening. "They're going to lie in court," Emma said, her voice trembling. "Of course they are," I said quietly. "They've been lying for years. The difference now is I have proof." Emma looked at me like I was someone she'd never met before. Maybe she hadn't. The hearing came fast. January air bit sharp as I stepped into the courthouse, my coat buttoned to the chin. Inside, the hall smelled faintly of old wood and bleach. My family was already there, clustered together like a pack, eyes darting toward me as if I were the intruder. My daughter smirked, just slightly, as though she still believed she could twist the story. My grandson avoided my eyes. The same boy who once clung to my skirt now slouched in a suit too big for his shoulders. The judge entered. The gavel struck. Papers shuffled. They spoke first. My daughter's voice dripped with false concern. "Your Honor, we only want what's best for my mother. She's forgetful, unstable. Last Christmas, she lashed out, refused to join us, and since then she's been erratic." Erratic. They used that word like a blade. But then Doyle rose, calm as a steady flame. He laid out the receipts, the deeds, the photographs. He handed over the medical evaluations confirming my mind was sharp, my health steady. And finally, he presented Emma's paper, the email. The courtroom hushed as the judge read it. My daughter's face blanched, lips pressed tight. My grandson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "This," Doyle said, his voice cutting clean, "is not concern. This is manipulation." I sat still, hands folded in my lap, heart steady. By the end of the session, the judge leaned forward, her gaze sharp. The court sees no evidence of incapacity. In fact, it appears the respondent has been subjected to undue influence and attempted financial exploitation. The words landed like thunder. My daughter's jaw clenched. My grandchildren stared at the table. The gavel struck again. Case dismissed. I walked out slowly, coat over my shoulders, head high. They didn't follow me. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, tea steaming in my cup. Outside, the snow fell heavy, muting the world into silence. For the first time, the weight in my chest felt lighter. But victory wasn't enough. Not yet. They had tried to take everything from me. Christmas, my dignity, my very name. They had called me old, weak, disposable. They had dragged me into court to erase me. And now they were the ones erased from my will. But there was still one thing left to do. Because revenge isn't complete when it's quiet. It's complete when everyone sees it. I picked up my pen, opened my notebook, and began to write. Names, dates, details. The truth they'd buried. And when I was done, they would wish they had left me in peace. The morning after court, the street was hushed under a crust of ice. Their house sat across from mine like nothing had happened, but I knew better. I imagined the tension inside, the slammed doors, the whispered blame. Families don't fracture quietly. They splinter with noise. I sipped my coffee, steam curling into the cold light, and unfolded the local paper. Page 3, bottom corner. Carter family petition. Denied. A small article, barely more than a paragraph, but enough. Their names in print tied to the word exploitation. That was the first crack in their perfect image. And I wasn't finished. By noon, I was at the community center. I hadn't stepped foot in that building for years, not since the grandkids' school concerts. The hall smelled of floor polish and old carpet, bulletin boards lined with flyers for bake sales and food drives. I walked past them all to the office of the director, a woman named Carol who had known me since my children were small. She looked up, surprised. "Josephine? Haven't seen you in forever. What brings you here?" I placed the notebook on her desk, the one I had filled with names, dates, stories. "I've got something people should know." She hesitated, glanced at the cover, then at me. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said. My voice didn't shake. By evening, she had copied every page, ready to circulate for the center's monthly newsletter and beyond. I didn't ask for pity. I asked for light. The truth shines brighter when it's shared. The next day, the fallout began. Neighbors crossed the street to ask questions. One after another, they appeared at my door, polite but curious. "We heard, is it true? They tried to take your house?" I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. I simply nodded. Yes, and they tried to erase me. By the third visitor, word had spread. Whispers traveled faster than Christmas carols. At the grocery store, I heard it in the aisles. "Imagine treating your grandmother like that." At the post office, heads turned when my daughter's name was mentioned. The mask was slipping. That evening, I sat on my porch, wrapped in my wool shawl, watching their lights flicker on one by one. I saw shadows pacing behind the curtains. Once, I heard shouting carried faintly through the icy air. Their fortress of family image was crumbling, not because I screamed, but because I whispered to the right ears. Then came the phone call. Not from my daughter this time, from her husband. His voice was low, tense. "Josephine," he said, "this has gone too far." "No," I answered. "It's gone just far enough." "You'll ruin us." "I'm not ruining you," I said. "You're doing that yourselves." He went quiet. I could almost hear his teeth grinding. Then he muttered, "If you keep this up, you'll regret it." And I laughed, quiet, bitter. "I've already lived the regret. Now it's your turn." I hung up before he could speak again. The next morning, I found something strange on my porch. A gift bag. Inside was a store-bought fruitcake still wrapped in plastic and a note in my daughter's handwriting. "Let's put this behind us. Family first. Family first." After all they'd done, those words looked like a threat more than a promise. I left the cake on the porch until the cold turned it stiff as stone. But their desperation gave me clarity. They weren't apologizing. They were scrambling. They could feel the ground shifting, and they were trying to plug the cracks with sugar and empty phrases. That week, I attended Sunday service at the old church for the first time in years. Heads turned when I walked in. Some people whispered. Some offered small nods of respect. Afterward, Pastor Miller shook my hand firmly. "Heard you've been through a storm," he said. "I'm still standing," I replied. And then, for the first time, I saw my daughter's face in public since the court ruling. She was walking toward the parking lot, chin high, grandchildren trailing behind her like shadows. When she noticed me, her smile flickered but never reached her eyes. She turned sharply, pulling the children toward their car. That told me everything. At home that night, I spread the remaining photographs across my table. Evidence of birthdays, graduations, every moment I had carried them through. I slid them into envelopes one by one, each labeled with the name of a neighbor, a church friend, a community leader. By the end of the evening, the stack was ready. This wasn't revenge done in shadows. This was truth pinned to every bulletin board, every mailbox. I stood by the window, looking out at their house once more. Their porch light flicked on, but no laughter came through the walls. Not anymore. They thought erasing me would be easy, that I'd fade quietly into old age. But now, every whisper carried my name, and theirs too, and I hadn't even shown them the worst of what I kept locked away. The envelopes went out on a Tuesday. By Friday, the whispers had become a chorus. Every corner of town seemed to know. At the diner, I heard it at the counter. "She raised them, and that's how they treat her?" At the library, two women paused mid-conversation when I walked past, one murmuring, "It's shameful." And at church the following Sunday, Pastor Miller's sermon circled around one phrase again and again: "Honor thy father and thy mother." He didn't need to name names. Everyone already knew. I sat in the pew, hands folded, head steady. Across the aisle, my daughter sat stiff as stone, her children restless at her side. My grandson kept glancing back toward me, cheeks flushed. My granddaughter chewed her nails until her mother smacked her hand away. They looked like a family cornered by their own reflection. That was only the beginning. The following week, Doyle, my lawyer, filed new paperwork. I had rewritten everything: my will, my trust, every account. Not a single dime would pass into their hands. Instead, I'd created a scholarship fund at the community center, one in my husband's name, for students who couldn't afford college. The first seed money alone was enough to fund 5 young people through their first year. That news traveled faster than gossip. By the end of the week, the center had announced it publicly: the Josephine and Robert Carter Scholarship, established by Mrs. Carter in honor of her late husband. The town applauded. My family did not. That night, the phone rang again. It was my daughter. No anger this time, no sharp edge, just a hollow, trembling voice. "Mom, please, don't do this, the kids. They'll never forgive you." I let the silence stretch until it hurt. Then I answered, cold and clear. "They never forgave me for existing. This isn't about forgiveness. This is about truth." I hung up. But the final twist wasn't in court papers, or gossip, or even the scholarship. It was in what I mailed out last. The small brown envelope. The one with the photo, Christmas morning, 1995. My husband by the tree, My children smiling, my grandchildren as toddlers with jam-sticky hands. Proof that once this family had been whole. Proof that love had existed here, real and raw, before they tried to bury it under greed. I sent that photograph to the local paper with a note. Remember what family used to mean. They printed it in the Sunday edition, right next to the scholarship announcement. The contrast was brutal. Then and now, joy and rot. Everyone saw it. Everyone compared. By Monday, my family couldn't walk into a store without feeling eyes on their backs. Their perfect image had cracked for good. I watched it all unfold from my porch, wrapped in my wool shawl, steam rising from my cup. The snow was nearly gone now, patches of grass poking through. Their Christmas lights had been packed away, but their shame still clung to the house like frost that wouldn't melt. Emma came by that afternoon. She sat across from me at the table, eyes wide, voice hushed. They're furious. Grandma, they say you've ruined everything. I shook my head slowly. No, I gave them the rope. They tied the knot themselves. She looked at me a long time, then whispered, I don't want to end up like them. You won't, I said, because you see it. That's the difference. When she left, the house was quiet again. The silence didn't weigh heavy this time. It felt like space I'd carved for myself. Later that evening, I walked to the cedar chest one last time. I placed the final envelope inside. My new will, notarized, ironclad. The lid shut with a creak, the kind that sounds final. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, the glow of the small tree still flickering faintly in the corner, and I whispered to no one, or maybe to the memory of my husband. They thought they could erase me. They forgot who raised them. They forgot who survived long before they did. The house hummed softly around me, the radiator clicking, the clock ticking steady. Across the street, their windows were dark. No laughter now, no glow, just silence. And in that silence, I felt the aftertaste of it all. Victory, yes, but bitter. Because no revenge, no matter how sharp, could restore what had once been. They had called me an old hag. Unneeded, disposable. Now the town knew better. But so did I.